Here's a couple of typical 108 problems that you might encounter, and one of the bigger ones that a lot of people seem to struggle with is how to handle complex fractions. What you're more likely to see is this guy right here, but I want to just focus on this one because it's the same thing, and a lot of times I'll do that in tutoring. I'll leave the algebra out. I'll pick a number that just satisfies some situation. It mirrors this guy right there. But what I want them to understand is that we're dealing with real numbers, and we need to know how to handle the real numbers before we try the algebra. But you would apply the same process to this guy. So, looking at a complex fraction, I want to know how to simplify. So when you're looking at this, you know that it should be 1/4 times 2 over 1, which gives you 1/2. That was like this sped up version, but let's slow it down, take a look at what's really happening there. Why is it you should multiply by the reciprocal? So there's two different ways you can handle this. The first is to look at the top as separate from the bottom. Before I get into that though, let's talk about why multiplying by the reciprocal work there. So if I have 1/2 of something, visually that's represented with just an object cut in half. That's what I'm talking about. And if I were to divide this by 2, you can intuitively go, oh, I need to do this and end up with 1/4. And so when we're dealing with something like this, you know it has to end up being 1/4 one way or another. Now notice that 2, I can always divide a number by 1 and I still get the same thing. So essentially I'm saying what is this 1/2 on top divided by 2 on bottom. And you know it has to be 1/4 one way or another. So what I want to do now is look at another situation. Again, 1/2 is represented with something like that. And if I wanted to take half of half, you end up doing the same thing. You would still slice that into 4 slices. And we know how to handle that guy. We multiply across the top. 1 times 1 is 1. Multiply across the bottom. 2 times 2 is 4. So you could see that when you have 1/2 times 1/2, or half of half, that ends up doing the same thing that this guy does, which means they have to be related one way or another. Oh hey, check this out. 1 over 2, that's the reverse, the reciprocal of 2 over 1. So this means whenever I have a complex fraction, I should multiply by the reciprocal of the bottom part of the fraction, and I would end up getting the same thing, which makes sense. Multiplication and division are inverses of each other. If I have 21 divided by 3, that means the same thing as 1/3 of 21. And you can see how those are reciprocals. So whenever you're dividing by something, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal of it. So that's the first technique we're going to use here. We're going to apply that process on the original problem we started with, meaning how do I solve this? Well, we're going to look at this as the top part being separate from the bottom part. And what I want to do is multiply by the reciprocal. So once you get everything down to one term, meaning it's all entirely multiplication and division, then you would take the top part and you're going to multiply it by the reciprocal of the bottom part, which goes in once, goes in twice, and you get 1/2. The other way that you can look at this is you can multiply by the lowest common denominator between all of the denominators in the complex fraction. So if you have 1/4 divided by 1/2, I can see that the lowest common denominator between the 2 and the 4 is 4. So if I multiply the top by 4, a lot of times I'll put it at fraction form so I can see what lines up with what. And if I multiply the bottom by the same thing, notice I've just multiplied by 1, because any number divided by itself is 1. So I'm not changing it, just the way it's expressed, meaning whatever I do on top, if I match it on bottom, we're good. So the 4's cancel up on top, leaving me with the 1. 2 goes into itself once, 2 goes into 4 twice, and when I multiply all those, I can see I get a 2 underneath. And every time you multiply by the lowest common denominator between all of the fractions, you'll clear out of that complex fraction every single time. I just think it's useful to understand why it is you can do that and it works, or why you can multiply by the reciprocal and it ends up solving it.